Martin's comedy act with Jerry Lewis made him a household name. But it was Martin's post-Lewis career that made him a star.
Dean Martin saw the truth about Jerry Lewis long before the rest of the world did. He summed it up in just 6 words, then spent the rest of his life refusing to explain what he meant. More than 60 years later, those 6 words still cast a shadow over everything that followed. When Jerry Lewis died in 2017, he left behind an estate estimated at around $50 million. But it wasn't the money that shocked people. It was what his will revealed. Jerry had 6 sons: Gary, Ronald, Anthony, Christopher, Scott, and Joseph. Every one of them was listed by name in the document, and every one of them was deliberately cut out of his estate. They received nothing, not a single dollar, not a family heirloom, not even a personal keepsake.
As I was embracing Dean, you were right over his shoulder. I'm thinking to myself, dear God, if Frank doesn't give me something to say, God, give me a line.
The wording of the will left no room for doubt. Jerry included the word intentionally twice. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a legal technicality. It was a final decision he wanted preserved forever. One name on that list was especially heartbreaking. Joseph Lewis had already been dead for 8 years. He died in 2009 at just 45 years old, living alone in a modest apartment in Utah. Before his death, Joseph reportedly wrote letter after letter to his father, hoping to repair their broken relationship. According to multiple accounts, every one of those letters was returned unopened. To the public, Jerry Lewis represented generosity and compassion. He was America's beloved comedian, the entertainer who devoted more than 4 decades to raising over $2.5 billion for children suffering from muscular dystrophy. Millions knew him as the man who never failed to make audiences laugh. But there was one person who had seen another side of Jerry long before any family disputes became public knowledge: Dean Martin. For 10 years, Dean stood beside Jerry every night. Together, they built one of the biggest entertainment partnerships America had ever seen. They conquered nightclubs, radio, television, and Hollywood itself. Yet at the height of their success, Dean quietly walked away, offering almost no public explanation. Years later, people would search for answers. They would read biographies, interviews, and memoirs, trying to understand why one of the greatest partnerships in entertainment history collapsed so suddenly. But perhaps Dean had already given the answer back in 1956.
Oh, I drink, but I'm not a boozer. I'm not an alcoholic or anything like that. But
just 6 words. 6 words he never publicly expanded upon again. Today, we're going to follow those 6 words and see where they ultimately led. If you've never heard of Martin and Lewis, here's why they mattered so much. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, they weren't simply successful. They were the biggest entertainment act in America. For nearly 8 years, they dominated every stage they stepped onto. They starred in 16 hit films, hosted a national television program, and packed nightclubs so quickly that tickets often disappeared before the performances were even officially announced. Dean Martin was the smooth singer. An Italian-American from Ohio with an effortless voice, relaxed confidence, and the kind of charm that could instantly make an audience feel at ease. Before meeting Jerry, Dean had already built a respectable career performing in clubs across the country. He was talented enough to earn a living, but not yet famous enough to become a legend. Jerry Lewis was the complete opposite. Born in Newark, New Jersey, to 2 vaudeville performers, he spent much of his childhood separated from his parents as they traveled from show to show. Attention became something he constantly chased, and he discovered early that making people laugh was often the fastest way to keep them from walking away. That lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life, shaping not only his comedy, but much of his personality.
And we literally grew up with so many people that were obsessed with, how dare you break up? You're screwing up my life.
Their partnership began almost by accident in 1946 at a nightclub in Atlantic City. Facing the possibility of being fired, they improvised. Dean began singing while Jerry suddenly burst onto the stage dressed as a busboy, interrupting the performance with complete chaos. The audience erupted with laughter, and in that unexpected moment, something extraordinary was born. Success came almost overnight. Within a year, they had their own radio show. Soon came television, then Paramount Pictures signed them to make movies. From the outside, their rise looked effortless. Behind the scenes, however, a very different story was quietly unfolding. Because there's one thing most people never realize about comedy partnerships. The success of Martin and Lewis was almost impossible to comprehend. By 1950, the duo was earning around $15,000 every single week from radio alone, an extraordinary amount for the time. Their Paramount films routinely grossed close to $20 million each, making them among Hollywood's most bankable stars. Then, in 1953, NBC signed them to what was then the largest television contract in history, a staggering $35 million deal. They weren't just famous, they were everywhere. Their faces appeared on the covers of America's biggest magazines. Fans crowded airports, surrounded hotel entrances, and screamed outside theaters wherever they traveled. Women reportedly threw hotel room keys onto the stage in hopes of spending just a few minutes with them. From the outside, it looked like the perfect partnership. But if you looked closely at the headlines, another pattern began to emerge. Again and again, newspapers described Jerry Lewis as the brilliant comic, the creative genius, the reason audiences bought tickets. Dean Martin was often mentioned almost as an afterthought, not Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis.
I'm not lazy. They want to think I'm lazy, but they know I work.
Instead, it became Jerry Lewis and his singer. At first, it may have seemed like careless wording, but when the same phrase appears often enough, it stops sounding accidental. It becomes the way people think. Dean noticed. He wasn't the type of man to complain publicly or demand attention. He rarely argued about headlines or fought for recognition. Instead, he watched quietly, said very little, and drew his own conclusions. And what he was seeing worried him. From the very beginning, Jerry had naturally taken charge of the mechanics of their act. He obsessed over timing, structured the nightclub routines, and constantly looked for ways to improve the comedy. Dean never objected. Their different personalities balanced each other perfectly. But as their fame exploded, Jerry's idea of what belonged under his control kept expanding. He no longer wanted to perform in the films. He wanted to shape them. By the early 1950s, Jerry had become deeply involved in every aspect of production. He questioned dialogue, suggested camera angles, rewrote scenes, and debated directors over nearly every creative decision. Many filmmakers eventually stopped resisting him because arguing took more energy than simply giving him what he wanted. The more power Jerry gained, the smaller Dean's role quietly became.
I mean, could I be where I am today if I were lazy and if I were a boozer?
Then came one decision that revealed just how much the balance between them had changed. In early 1954, Jerry abruptly dismissed the team's head writers, Ed Simmons and Norman Lear, without consulting Dean. Those writers weren't just employees. Their job was to protect the partnership itself. They made sure Dean had memorable lines, strong comedic moments, and equal opportunities to shine beside Jerry. They understood that Martin and Lewis only worked because audiences loved both men for different reasons. Jerry fired them anyway. He didn't ask Dean's opinion. He didn't even bother telling him beforehand.
And the only reason I work is to provide for my family. And
years later, Norman Lear would become one of the most influential television creators in American history, producing groundbreaking shows that changed American television forever. But that's not the important part of the story. The important part is what Jerry's decision revealed. The people responsible for protecting Dean's place in the act were suddenly gone. And the man who removed them never considered that Dean deserved to be part of the conversation. If you wanted to know where Martin and Lewis were heading, that single decision told you almost everything. Then came the moment Dean would likely never forget. Later in 1954, Look magazine published a lavish feature on Martin and Lewis during the production of one of their films. It was exactly the kind of national publicity every Hollywood star hoped for. The centerpiece was a huge 2-page photo spread. Jerry Lewis filled the pages from edge to edge, making one of his famous exaggerated facial expressions that audiences adored. Dean Martin wasn't beside him. He wasn't standing in the background. He wasn't cropped into the corner. He wasn't anywhere. When Dean walked into the dressing room that day, Jerry was already flipping through the magazine. Laughing, he reportedly held it up and said, "Dean, you've got to see this. They made me look like a giant."
And the serious work that I do, I try to have a little fun with it.
He wasn't wrong. He looked enormous because there was nobody else in the picture. Dean looked at the pages. No one has ever recorded exactly what he said. Perhaps he said nothing at all. But several people later recalled that his face didn't show amusement. What made the moment painful wasn't the magazine's editorial choice. Magazines leave people out all the time. What mattered was Jerry's reaction. He laughed. He celebrated the photograph. And he never seemed to notice that his partner, the man who had helped build every ounce of that success, had disappeared from the story entirely. It wasn't necessarily cruelty. Cruelty usually requires intention. This felt different. It suggested something even more unsettling. Dean Martin had become so invisible to Jerry Lewis that Jerry genuinely didn't realize he was missing. A partnership can survive disagreements. It can survive unequal praise, creative arguments, exhausting schedules, and even enormous egos. But one thing is almost impossible to survive: the moment you realize the person standing beside you no longer truly sees you. Sometime during 1954, while looking at a magazine spread that erased him completely, Dean Martin reached that moment. He still owed Paramount 3 more films, so he finished the job. But from that day forward, he wasn't counting new opportunities. He was counting down the months until he could finally walk away.
I wouldn't change one thing. Not one thing.
The final Martin and Lewis film, Hollywood or Bust, went into production during the spring of 1956. By then, the partnership that had once looked effortless had already fallen apart behind the scenes. There were no explosive arguments, no fists thrown, no dramatic walkouts that made newspaper headlines. Instead, there was something much colder: silence. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had largely stopped speaking to one another except when the cameras absolutely required it. They arrived at the studio separately, rehearsed separately whenever possible, and spent their breaks on opposite sides of the set. If one needed to communicate with the other, the message often traveled through director Frank Tashlin instead of being spoken face to face. It wasn't a temporary disagreement anymore. It had become routine. Jerry Lewis later looked back on those months in his memoir, written nearly 50 years after the breakup. "We continued to perform together," he wrote, "but we weren't really speaking." He admitted that he kept hoping things would somehow return to normal, comparing that hope to the way a child believes a fairy tale will eventually have a happy ending. Deep down, however, he already knew it wouldn't. Dean Martin never left his own version of those final months. There was no memoir, no detailed interviews, no letters explaining what he felt. That silence, in many ways, was entirely consistent with Dean's personality. When something in his life was over, he rarely revisited it. He simply accepted it, finished what he had promised to do, and quietly moved on. Yet audiences never suspected a thing. Night after night, whether in Las Vegas, New York, or cities across America, Martin and Lewis walked onto the stage and delivered the same polished act that had made them famous. They joked, sang, interrupted one another's routines, and made thousands of people laugh exactly as they always had. The chemistry still appeared effortless, Nobody sitting in those theaters realized they were watching two men performing a partnership that had already ended emotionally months before. That takes an extraordinary amount of discipline. It's one thing to continue showing up at work after deciding to leave. It's another to perform at the highest level every single night while pretending nothing has changed. But before the curtain finally came down, there was one last conversation. The 6 words that Dean Martin never publicly repeated. According to Jerry Lewis's memoir, the moment happened during rehearsals for Hollywood or Bust. The cast and crew were preparing another scene. Dean had learned his lines, hit his marks, and was waiting for filming to continue. Suddenly, Jerry stopped everything. He walked across the set in front of the director, the crew, the supporting actors, and everyone else watching. Then he corrected Dean's performance. Not privately, not quietly, publicly. He instructed Dean to deliver his next line differently, speaking less like a partner making a suggestion and more like someone giving orders. It wasn't simply about acting. It was about authority. One man telling another how to do his job while an audience looked on. Dean didn't argue. He glanced toward director Frank Tashlin, perhaps expecting him to step in. Tashlin remained silent, so Dean performed the scene exactly the way Jerry wanted. The rehearsal continued, but something had finally reached its limit. Later that same day, Dean found Jerry away from the cameras. No speeches, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just 6 words. "You're nothing to me but a $sign." Those words survived because Jerry Lewis chose to include them in his memoir decades later. Dean Martin never wrote about the encounter himself, yet Jerry remembered the sentence with remarkable precision, even after nearly half a century. Some conversations fade with time. Others stay with you because they hit exactly where they were meant to. Dean wasn't trying to win an argument. He wasn't trying to hurt Jerry. He was simply stating the conclusion he had reached after years of watching their partnership change. From Dean's perspective, he had stopped being a friend, stopped being an equal, stopped being a partner. He had become a valuable piece of a highly profitable machine. As long as the machine kept making money, everything else seemed secondary. And once Dean realized that, the partnership no longer had anything left to save. Jerry's reaction, according to his own account, was silence. The smile that almost always seemed glued to his face disappeared instantly. Neither man had anything more to say. They finished filming, they completed the publicity tour. Then they honored the final commitments still remaining on their contract. Their last live performance together took place at New York's legendary Copacabana nightclub on July 25, 1956. The date carried an almost unbelievable coincidence. It was exactly 10 years after the night they had first performed together. The audience had no idea it was witnessing the end of an era. They laughed, they applauded. Many stood for a long ovation. Some reportedly cried. To everyone watching, Martin and Lewis looked exactly as they always had. Only the two men on stage knew it would be the last time. When the curtain finally fell, they didn't leave together. Dean walked out through one exit. Jerry walked out through another. Neither realized it would be 2 decades before they shared another stage. During those 20 years, Dean Martin transformed into the entertainer most people remember today. He became a Rat Pack legend, hosted his own wildly successful television variety show, recorded hit songs, and starred in major Hollywood films. For the first time in his career, every success belonged solely to him. There was no partner, no one directing him, no one telling him how to perform. And whenever interviewers tried to bring up Jerry Lewis, Dean almost always answered with only a sentence or two before changing the subject. Dean Martin quietly moved on after the breakup. Jerry Lewis never really did. Almost immediately after Martin and Lewis separated, Jerry signed a $10 million contract with Paramount Pictures, the richest deal Hollywood had ever offered a single comedian at the time. It was everything he had been working toward. Now there was no partner to compromise with, no equal voice, no one standing beside him. Jerry directed his own movies, rewrote scripts, supervised editing, chose camera angles, and involved himself in nearly every creative decision. For the first time, he possessed complete artistic control. And to be fair, some of the results were outstanding. His 1963 film, The Nutty Professor, became both a commercial hit and a critical success. While many American reviewers remained divided over his work, French film critics embraced him as a visionary. Influential intellectuals wrote essays praising his directing style, his visual storytelling, and his willingness to experiment with comedy in ways few filmmakers ever attempted. In Europe, Jerry Lewis wasn't simply a comedian, he was considered an artist. But while audiences admired the films, another reputation was quietly spreading throughout Hollywood. It had nothing to do with box office numbers, and everything to do with how he treated the people around him. Crew members spoke of endless last-minute rewrites that forced entire departments to start over after hours of preparation. Directors, actors, and technicians often found themselves adjusting to sudden creative changes because Jerry had decided something should be different. Small mistakes could bring public criticism. Disagreeing with him rarely ended well. Several actresses who worked alongside Jerry during that era later described sets where his approval became the most valuable currency on the production. If you had it, your experience was manageable. If you lost it, life could become very difficult. One story in particular continued resurfacing years later. Actress Karen Sharp, who appeared with Jerry in The Disorderly Orderly in 1964, later described an incident that was reported in a Vanity Fair investigation published after Jerry's death. According to her account, she was called to Jerry's office under the pretense of discussing a costume fitting. Instead, she claimed, the meeting became something entirely different. She refused his advances. Afterwards, she said, the atmosphere on the production changed completely. For the remainder of filming, she believed Jerry used his influence to isolate her, ensuring that cast and crew members kept their distance. Whether out of fear or professional self-preservation, few people challenged him. Most simply stayed silent. Hollywood, after all, has never been a place where young actors willingly risk careers by confronting powerful stars. Yet while these stories circulated privately, Jerry's public image remained remarkably different. Every Labor Day, millions of Americans watched him host the Muscular Dystrophy Association Telethon, an event that became one of television's most recognizable charity broadcasts. Year after year, he raised extraordinary amounts of money for children battling muscular dystrophy. Over 4 decades, those telethons generated billions of dollars for research and patient care. Watching Jerry with the children, it was difficult not to see genuine compassion. He laughed with them. He cried with them. He celebrated every donation as though it personally mattered. That side of Jerry Lewis was unquestionably real. But so, many believed, was the other side. Once the cameras stopped rolling, he returned to a world where he preferred to control every decision and every person around him. There was, however, one thing he could never control: memory. On March 21, 1987, Dean Martin's oldest son, Dean Paul Dino Martin Jr., was killed when his military jet crashed during a training flight. He was only 35 years old. Of Dean's 7 children, friends and family often said Dino was the one he felt closest to. The loss devastated him. When the funeral was held, Jerry Lewis arrived alone. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't seek attention. He quietly walked into the church and stood near the back, hidden in the shadows throughout the entire service. He never approached Dean. He didn't sign the guest book. He didn't introduce himself to the family. When the funeral ended, he simply slipped away as quietly as he had arrived. He never intended anyone to know he had been there, but someone noticed. Later, Dean was told that Jerry had stood silently in the back of the church for the entire service, asking for nothing and drawing no attention to himself. That evening, Dean picked up the telephone. According to Jerry Lewis's memoir, when he answered, he heard 2 simple words: "Hey, Jer." Only 2 words. Yet behind them lay more than 30 years of silence. The conversation reportedly lasted over an hour. Both men cried. At one point, Dean simply said, "Life's too short, my friend." Many people remember the famous 1976 reunion on the Jerry Lewis MDA telethon, when Frank Sinatra surprised Jerry by bringing Dean Martin onto the stage. The audience erupted and the 2 men hugged. Millions of viewers believed they had just witnessed the healing of one of entertainment's greatest feuds. It was a beautiful television moment, but it was still television. 2 lifelong performers understood exactly how to create an unforgettable scene. The phone call after Dino's funeral was different. There were no cameras, no applause, no audience, just one grieving father calling the man he hadn't truly spoken to in decades because that man had quietly come to honor his son without asking for recognition. That was the reconciliation that mattered. 2 years later, in 1989, Jerry surprised Dean once again by appearing unannounced at Dean's 72nd birthday celebration in Las Vegas. Dean embraced him warmly. Then, loud enough for the room to hear, he said, "I love you, and I mean it." 6 years later, Dean Martin was gone. Jerry Lewis lived another 22 years. He continued acting, directing, performing, and making public appearances well into his 80s. After Dean's death, Jerry was once asked how he remembered his former partner. His answer was painfully brief. He was sad and lonely, and that's how he died. There is something about that sentence that lingers, not because it explains Dean Martin, but because it may reveal how Jerry Lewis understood loss, and perhaps, in the end, himself. The man who spent his entire life building audiences. The man who filled theaters, television studios, and movie sets with endless energy. The man who inspired millions of strangers to donate billions of dollars to children in need. In the end, when speaking about Dean Martin, he described him as a man who was sad and lonely. It's a sentence that stays with you, not because it necessarily defines Dean Martin, but because it raises another question. Was Jerry Lewis describing Dean, or was he unknowingly describing the loneliness that had surrounded so much of his own life? Dean Martin never wrote a memoir explaining why their partnership ended. He never sat down for a tell-all interview. He never tried to convince the public that he had been right. He never launched a campaign to defend his reputation or criticize Jerry Lewis. Instead, he said 6 unforgettable words in 1956 to the only person who truly needed to hear them. Then he got on with his life. Jerry Lewis took a different path. Over the following decades, he returned to Dean again and again in books, interviews, documentaries, and television appearances. He eventually wrote an entire memoir describing their partnership as a great love story, reflecting on what they had built together and what he believed had been lost. Yet the contrast is difficult to ignore. The man who wrote so passionately about love and loyalty also signed a legal document making certain that every one of his sons would inherit nothing. Among those names was Joseph Lewis. By the time Jerry's will was finalized, Joseph had already been dead for years. Before his death, he reportedly spent years writing letters to his father. Those letters came back unopened. Gary Lewis later said he believed the rejection destroyed his brother long before his body finally gave out. Whether or not one agrees with that conclusion, it's impossible to ignore how much pain existed inside that family. Perhaps Dean Martin had recognized something long before anyone else did. There is a version of this story where Jerry Lewis was neither hero nor villain, simply a deeply gifted man, brilliant, driven, capable of remarkable generosity toward strangers, yet also capable of hurting the people closest to him in ways that lasted a lifetime. Human beings are often complicated enough to be both. That version of Jerry Lewis is probably the fairest one. But if that's true, then Dean Martin may have understood it decades before the rest of the world did. Not during a dramatic fight, not during the breakup, But in an ordinary dressing room sometime in 1954, while looking at a magazine spread where he had quietly disappeared from the story, he saw something. He named it once, and then he walked away. Maybe that's the real lesson behind this story. People rarely reveal themselves through one terrible moment. More often, they reveal themselves through ordinary decisions repeated over and over again, especially when they believe nobody is paying attention. The real question isn't whether those moments happen. It's how long it takes us to believe what they're showing us. Dean Martin needed 10 years before he finally accepted the answer. Jerry Lewis's sons spent much of their lives living with the consequences of it. So what do you think? Was Dean Martin right to walk away without ever publicly defending himself? Or should he have spoken out and told the world what he believed was happening behind the scenes? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more untold stories from the golden age of Hollywood, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.